It happened in the middle of the day. The Harvard courtyard was busy, filled with students rushing between classes, tourists snapping photos, and professors walking in their long coats. But no one expected what came next. A young man stepped into the center, his jaw tight, his eyes fierce. His name was Michael Carter, a 22-year-old philosophy student. He had a reputation: sharp mind, sharper tongue, known for his debates against faith. He called himself an atheist, proudly, loudly. In his hand, he carried a hammer. At the center of the courtyard stood a statue, one that had been there for nearly 150 years, a figure of the Virgin Mary, carved from white marble, her arms open, her eyes lowered in calm. She had stood through storms, snow, and decades of change, a gift once placed there by immigrant families long ago. Michael looked at her with defiance. "Stone doesn't save anyone," he shouted. His voice cut through the hum of the crowd. Heads turned, phones lifted. Some laughed nervously, others frowned. Then, before anyone could stop him, he raised the hammer high and brought it down. The sound rang across the courtyard. A sharp crack, marble against iron. Gasps broke out. Someone screamed. The Virgin's arm splintered, pieces scattering across the stone path. Michael struck again. Another crack, louder this time. Dust burst into the air. Students froze where they stood. Some covered their mouths. Others raised their phones to film. By the third strike, the statue's face chipped. A fragment fell, sliding across the ground until it stopped at the feet of a girl clutching her rosary. She bent, trembling, and picked it up with tears already welling in her eyes. The crowd grew louder. Shouts of anger, cries of disbelief, the word "stop" echoing from different corners. But Michael only breathed harder, his chest heaving, his hands white on the hammer's handle. And then it was done. The statue collapsed against its base, cracked and broken. Pieces of marble littered the ground. The Virgin's cloak split. Her open hands reduced to fragments. For the first time in over a century, she no longer stood whole. The Virgin Mary statue had been more than stone. It stood just under 6 feet tall, carved from Italian marble that had been shipped across the ocean in the 1870s. Her robe had once been painted faintly in blue, though the years had faded the color to the palest shade. She had stood with arms open wide, palms lifted in gentle offering. Her eyes, carved with extraordinary care, seemed to look downward, not in judgment, but in listening. As though every whispered prayer was heard, she was not just a piece of art. She was history. The statue had been placed there by Irish immigrants in 1875, just 3 years after the Great Boston Fire had nearly consumed the city. Those families had prayed for protection, and when their homes survived, they kept their vow to honor the Virgin. The statue became a symbol of their survival, a sentinel that stood quietly while generations came and went. And now, in a few minutes of rage, she was broken. The courtyard fell silent. Students stared at the shattered pieces. Professors stood frozen. Tourists lowered their cameras, unable to process what they had seen. Then the voices began. How could you? This is sacred. Get him out! Some rushed forward to stop Michael, but he had already stepped back, breathing hard, sweat running down his forehead. He raised his chin with pride, glaring at the crowd. See, he shouted, voice hoarse. It's just stone. Nothing happened. But he was wrong. Even as the pieces lay scattered, something shifted. The air grew warmer. Though the afternoon had been cold, a faint fragrance drifted across the courtyard. Roses. Students looked around, confused, whispering. There were no flowers nearby, no gardens blooming this early in spring. Yet the scent grew stronger, clinging to the air like perfume. Candles had been placed near the statue days before by a small prayer group. As the hammer fell, most had been blown out by the crowd's rush. Now, without warning, their wicks sparked. Flames rose tall again, steady and bright, though no one had touched them. And then came the sound. Not loud, not clear, but a low hum, soft and steady. Some thought it was the wind, others swore it was singing. No words, only a note, deep and sorrowful, carried on the air. Students froze. A few crossed themselves. Others stood pale, mouths slightly open. Michael heard it too. For a moment, his hand trembled on the hammer, but he set his jaw and forced a laugh. Mass hysteria, he muttered. That's all it is. Yet his eyes flickered with something else. Doubt. Security arrived. Michael dropped the hammer, lifted his hands, and walked away without resisting. The crowd parted, some shouting, some spitting at his feet. Others remained silent, clutching rosaries, their eyes fixed on the broken statue. At the base, students knelt, gathering pieces of marble with care, as though each fragment was still holy. One girl whispered prayers over them. Another boy placed flowers gently across the shattered cloak. By evening, candles surrounded the ruins. Dozens gathered in silence, their faces lit by flame. Some cried openly. Others stood still, staring at what remained. And though the statue was broken, the courtyard no longer felt empty. The scent of roses lingered, long after the last students left for the night. Michael walked away from Harvard Square, pride on his lips, but unease in his chest. He believed he had proved his point. But within 24 hours, he would find himself back in that same church. Not to mock, not to debate, but to weep. That night, while the broken statue lay surrounded by candles, the story of how it came to stand there was told again and again. It began more than 150 years earlier, in the autumn of 1872, when Boston burned. Flames had swept through the city with a fury no one expected. Entire blocks vanished in hours. Families fled with only the clothes on their backs. Churches fell, businesses collapsed, lives were reduced to ash. In the middle of it all, immigrant families from Ireland clung to their faith. Many lived in wooden houses near the edge of Cambridge, where the fire threatened to leap across the river. They gathered in small kitchens, clutching rosaries, whispering prayers that the flames would turn, and somehow they did. When the fire was finally contained, whole neighborhoods had vanished. but their small cluster of homes still stood, untouched. The families called it a mercy. Some said they had seen sparks fall and die before reaching their rooftops. Others swore the wind shifted just when the flames drew near. That winter, those families made a vow. "If you protect us," they whispered in prayer, "we will honor you here forever." They pooled their wages from bricklayers, seamstresses, dock workers. Together, they commissioned a statue of the Virgin Mary, carved from marble shipped from Italy. In 1875, the statue was placed in a courtyard near Harvard, not on a grand altar, not hidden inside a cathedral, but outside, where every passerby could see her. She was not meant for the few. She was meant for everyone. The families placed flowers at her feet. Priests blessed her. Children touched her hands before school. And the vow was kept. As decades passed, the statue became more than decoration. In the 1890s, when a cholera outbreak struck Boston, mothers brought their sick children to sit in the courtyard. Some swore fevers broke within hours. In 1927, when a hurricane tore across New England, a tree fell across the courtyard. The branches crushed benches and broke windows. Yet the statue stood untouched, not even a chip in her cloak. In 1965, when protests rocked Harvard's campus, some students spray-painted walls and toppled benches, but no one laid a hand on her. Even the most rebellious paused, eyes drawn to her lowered gaze. And over the years, quiet miracles were whispered. A boy lost in a snowstorm was found asleep at her base, warm and smiling. A candle left burning through the night stood tall in the morning, wax untouched. During vigils, some said her eyes glistened, though the marble could not hold tears. The stories spread, never officially recorded, but passed from parent to child, neighbor to neighbor. By 2025, she had stood for nearly 150 years, a silent guardian over generations, until Michael's hammer fell. After leaving the courtyard, Michael returned to his dorm. His friends messaged him, some praising his boldness, others furious at the backlash. His name was already trending online. He smiled at the attention, but when night came, unease crept in. At 3:33 a.m., he woke suddenly. His heart raced. His room was dark, yet he swore he saw the faint outline of a figure standing near his desk. Eyes lowered, hands open. When he blinked, it was gone. He laughed nervously, shook his head, and blamed exhaustion. But the unease stayed. The next morning, as he crossed Harvard Yard, he caught a smell on the wind. Roses. Sweet, heavy, unmistakable. He frowned, looking around. There were no gardens nearby, no fresh flowers this early in spring. Yet the fragrance clung to him until he reached class. Later that afternoon, he opened his backpack to find a single white petal resting on his notebook. He froze. He hadn't put it there. None of his friends had. The paper beneath was faintly scented, as though pressed against flowers. Michael shoved it away, refusing to think about it. That evening, he sat in the library, books spread across the table. The chatter of students filled the air. But then, for a brief moment, he heard something else. A whisper, Soft, steady, not in English, not in any language he recognized. He looked up sharply. No one nearby was speaking. The sound came again, close to his ear. He spun, his chair scraping the floor, but the space behind him was empty. Other students stared at him, puzzled. Michael muttered an apology, cheeks hot, and sat back down. But the whispers lingered in his mind. By the second night, sleep did not come. He lay awake, staring at the ceiling, feeling a weight in his chest. Not heavy, not crushing, but steady, insistent. As though someone was there, waiting for him to listen. He pressed his hands to his face, groaning. He wanted to dismiss it as stress, as guilt, as the backlash online. Yet deep inside, something cracked. For the first time in years, Michael Carter, Harvard's proudest atheist, felt unsure. By the next evening, the courtyard outside the church was full. Word of the statue's destruction had spread beyond Harvard. Locals came with candles. Students brought flowers. Elderly parishioners carried their rosaries. The broken pieces of marble lay gathered at the base of the pedestal, carefully arranged as though still part of her robe. The air was thick with murmurs, with prayers whispered under breath, with the quiet sound of grief. Michael stood at the edge of the crowd, his hood pulled low. He had not meant to come. Pride had told him to stay away, but something deeper had pulled him back. The scent of roses clung to him still, no matter where he went. The whispers haunted his nights. Now he stood watching, uneasy, his heart beating too fast. The courtyard was lit with hundreds of candles. Their flames swayed gently, but none blew out, though the wind was sharp. Families knelt before the fragments, some weeping openly. A professor stood with his hands clasped, eyes wet. Even children sat silently, as if understanding the weight of the moment. A priest read quietly from Scripture, his voice soft, nearly drowned by the crowd's breath. But no one truly looked at him. All eyes were fixed on the broken statue, its pieces glimmering in the candlelight. Michael's throat tightened. His chest felt heavier. He stepped forward before he realized he had moved, drawn closer to the center. As he approached, the fragrance filled him again. Roses, stronger now, sweeter, overwhelming. He pressed a hand to his face, but it did not fade. Then came the sound, not loud, not forced, but soft singing. Faint harmonies rising like breath, echoing through the courtyard. No choir stood there. No speaker hummed, yet the melody wove through the crowd, sorrowful and tender. People froze. Some gasped. Many fell to their knees, their tears spilling freely. Michael's eyes darted from face to face. No one was speaking, yet the sound was real, vibrating in his chest. And then he saw it. The fragments of marble glowed, not brightly, not blinding, but faint, steady, golden. The broken hand, the cracked cloak, the chipped face, each piece shimmered with light. Michael stumbled forward, his knees hitting the stone. He pressed his hands against the cold ground, his head bowed. Tears streamed down his cheeks before he understood why. They were not tears of fear, not even guilt. They were tears of something he could not name. A weight lifted, a presence felt, a love that demanded nothing but broke everything inside him. Around him, others wept too. Professors, students, strangers. The courtyard filled with sobbing, not loud, not chaotic, but deep, cleansing. Michael's chest heaved. He whispered, barely audible, I don't understand. But still, the tears came. The glow faded slowly, but the peace it left behind remained. The singing stilled, but silence felt alive, heavy with meaning. The scent of roses lingered until dawn. The statue remained broken, her fragments scattered, but no one left saying she was gone. If anything, she felt more present than before, as though her spirit had stretched beyond stone. The next morning, the courtyard was filled again. Flowers covered the ground, notes of thanks tucked among the pieces. Some came out of curiosity, others in faith, but all left changed. Michael returned too. He did not stand at the center. He did not speak. He did not debate. He sat quietly in the pews of the church nearby, head lowered, notebook closed. He had spent years arguing that statues were lifeless stone, and perhaps they were. But whatever had filled that courtyard, roses, song, light, tears, was more than stone. In the weeks that followed, no one rebuilt the statue. No sculptor touched the fragments. Instead, the pieces remained on display, circled by candles, surrounded by flowers. People said it was better that way. It was not about perfection. It was about presence. Harvard professors still called it coincidence. Scientists spoke of hysteria. But those who had been there said otherwise. They spoke of the peace they felt, the tears that came without warning, the weight in their chest that turned into something lighter. And Michael? He never called himself a believer, but he stopped calling himself an enemy. One night, when asked why he had broken down in tears, he answered simply, I don't know. I just know I wasn't alone. The Virgin's statue was shattered, but her story was not. She had stood for 150 years as a promise kept, and even broken, she kept it still. Because you don't need to believe in miracles to understand why an atheist fell to his knees that night.